All right, we're going to go ahead and put the parts from our old screen onto the new one. You can start with the home button or the rear panel. I'm going to go ahead and put this into position, and take note of the way that it is orientated up there at the top. It kind of goes over that little flap that hangs down from the top of the display. And you can do this before or after the home button. It doesn't make too much of a difference, but once you get that into position, we will have the 7 screws that need to be put back into the frame. And before you tighten down the screw on the very bottom, I would go ahead and put the home button back in. This is going to make it easier to get that cover plate underneath, because it actually tucks under that tab that comes down from the back plate. So make sure you just kind of slide that under. And then we can go ahead and put the 3 screws back in. From here, I'll go ahead and put the 3 side screws on left and right, so there's a total of 6. Make sure you get the plastic guide back in for where the front-facing camera sits. If your replacement screen doesn't come with one of those, it will help keep the camera centered, and it also keeps dust from accumulating on the lens. There should be some adhesive also that you can peel off to make the microphone stick onto the frame. So make sure if there's any plastic in there that it gets peeled back and exposes the adhesive, and then we can set the microphone into the correct position using that little peg as a guideline. We can also rearrange these cables later on if we need to when we put it into the phone. So if you don't get it in the right order, don't panic yet. That's easy enough to adjust, but do pay careful attention to those little components, because they have to go into those corresponding channels or slots, otherwise you're going to have problems. So that should sit nice and flush with the frame when you put it into position. If it's sticking up at all or you feel a lump there, you need to go back and adjust it and make sure everything's lined up properly. Now we can go ahead and set our speaker into place. Again, using the pegs as a guideline, you should be able to get that straight with no problem. The camera wraps over the top, and again, those 2 little holes are going to line up with the pegs that are underneath. And this is the tricky part. Once you get everything into position and you've got the camera inside of its guide, we want to kind of hold that in place and get this cover plate on at the same time. So this part can be a little tricky. It does require some patience, but if anything slips out of position, make sure you go back and straighten it out, and also make sure you get that little loop to go around the bottom piece here. Once everything is into position, the sooner you get one of these screws in, the better. It will make your life much easier. I usually start with the center one, and you don't have to tighten it all the way down yet. You just want to get this all kind of lined up before you get the other 2 screws into position. If you take a look at it here from the side, you should be able to see that everything's nice and flush. And again, if not, you can go back and readjust it. I'll go ahead and put the other 2 screws in now. And as you can see, the front-facing camera is nice and centered. Make sure that your home button is clicking at this point, and we'll move on to the more challenging part. Not everyone performs this step, but if you want your phone to remain water resistant, you're going to want to replace the adhesive that goes around the edge of the screen. This stuff is tricky to work with. There's no easy way really that I found. I mean, the method that I'm showing you here is the easiest way that I know of, but it doesn't necessarily make it real fun to work with. First thing I like to do is cut out a small area here so that we can allow the battery cable, which is still disconnected from the phone, to fit through this template. Don't worry about the bottom layer, that's going to get peeled off, but you definitely want to cut a hole in the top layer and then very carefully peel the bottom layer of plastic away from the adhesive. And be careful not to touch anything here that's sticky. This stuff sticks to everything. And once it does, it's very difficult to remove. When you pull on it, it stretches and then it never goes back to its original shape. So you really get one shot with this, which is why I recommend buying several of these. They're very inexpensive. And if you mess up one or two, you can try again until you get it right. So we want to center this obviously with the phone. And that is a tricky part because you might think you're centered at the top and the bottom end might be a different story. So I recommend you kind of lay it on top first to line it up and see where everything fits. Once you do, you're going to just kind of go around the edges and push this into position with your fingers. And then you'll see that I come back with a plastic tool to very carefully go around the edge again. We want to make sure this bonds with the housing. And it doesn't always do that. It likes to come up with the plastic as you go to peel this away. So again, you want to take your time, make sure you're not pulling the adhesive off of the housing. Again, I don't have any tips or tricks for getting this off in one piece. It's never fun, but if you take your time, you'll kind of get a feel for it after a while. And the key here is to just be very patient, move slow, and you can kind of help yourself by using something that isn't got a surface that's going to stick to the adhesive. I'm just kind of going around this with the plastic stick spudger and going between the two layers, and again being very careful to make sure that the adhesive doesn't stick to my tool and then it doesn't stay stuck to the plastic coating. And once you get started here, it gets a little easier towards the end until you get right to the top, and that's where it gets really sticky again. So you just have to take your time. It might fall back on itself, but usually once you've peeled it off, it will come off easier the second time. But here at the top, it's just real hit and miss as far as you can see. I got lucky on this one. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times these things like to get all stuck together and very annoying to work with. Once we've got that apart, be very careful not to touch it. Again, it's going to stick to everything and you get one shot at putting the screen on, because if you take it off again, it's going to stick. So what I'm going to do is lay some of this plastic right on top of the upper end, because the display itself is going to come into contact with the housing and we don't want it to stick just yet. We want to make sure that we've got the cables plugged in first. And unfortunately, it looked like my camera wanted to reposition itself at this point, and I'm not sure why. I think it was kind of falling down a little bit. So hopefully this will all stay within the frame. Go ahead and get your 3 connectors plugged in, replace the cover plate, put the screws in, and then we will very carefully install the display assembly onto the housing. Now you can see I propped the screen up there, and that will make it much easier to work with, because it's nice to have both hands free at this point. Now remember to connect your battery and put that cover plate back on. If at any point you're working with this adhesive, you get ahead of yourself, it is usually going to mean that you have to peel it off and put in a new piece. So you want to make sure you are 100% ready to go when it comes to reattaching the screen. Right, so I'm going to very carefully move that little plastic out of the way. Make sure that you tuck the top end of the screen underneath the edge of the housing. And once you do that, that's it. It is time to put the whole thing back together. If you take it apart now, you get to start over with the adhesive. So just work your way around very gently. You should not have to press very hard in order for the screen to go into the housing. And everything should line up straight all the way around. Once it does, you want to remember to put your 2 screws back into the bottom of the phone, and you should be good to go. If you found the video helpful, like it, share it, check out my channel for more tutorials and product reviews, and most of all, remember to hit the subscribe button. Feel free to leave your feedback in the comments section, and thanks for watching.